Whip to move the adjournment.
I beg to move that this House do now adjourn.
The question is that this House do now adjourn. Joe Morris.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and thank you all for thank you, Mr. Speaker, granting the debate. I'd like to welcome the Treasury Minister to her place. She will know, as well as I do, as well as members from across the House do, that we face banking deserts across the country, with many people shut off from accessing very basic face-to-face services. Now, in my constituency, we have a crisis that the figures merely hint at. Northumberland has lost over half of its bank branches since 2015, and figures from which show that the Hexham constituency has lost over 70% of its branches, with only 5 branches remaining in the constituency. Now, for many colleagues, 5 bank branches will sound almost luxurious, but this is the largest constituency in England, covering from Throckley on Newcastle's western edge out to Gilsland in Cumbria, from Blanchland on our border with County Durham to Burness, which is a stone's throw from Scotland. These bank branch closures don't just mean an inconvenience to my constituents, they present a toxic cocktail that damages both the quality of life and holds back the growth of our rural economy. The services that the bank branches provide to our constituents are broad-ranging and impactful, services that many have to rely on during life's big moments. Obvious services such as help with large payments, support with mortgages, but also life events such as bereavements or in securing power of attorney. Madam Deputy Speaker, the compassion, expert support and guidance that bank branches provide to our constituency cannot be allowed to disappear or be seen as an inevitable consequence in order to have better digital services. Their closures let down our young people who want to start businesses but who find it harder to do so due to their inability to have face-to-face discussions, as well as our older people who find access to cash hard to come by, or who have to trek across rural Northumberland on public transport, in some cases to reach their closest branch. I will.
Madam Deputy Speaker, can I commend the Honourable Gentleman for Hexham for bringing this forward? He's absolutely right. Everyone in the House here tonight will have experienced the very thing that the Honourable Gentleman refers to. In my constituency, I lost 11 banks in total. But does he agree that before banks should make any decisions about closure, they should have an alternative in place? In other words, is there going to be a banking hub? Is there going to be an ATM? Is there going to be alternative services where they're given through the post offices? Does he feel that the banks need to do those things and put them in place before they close any bank?
I thank the gentleman for his intervention, and I very much agree that we need to look before bank branches close at the results of those closures and look at what we can do to mitigate the results of them. But we need to make sure that the rural economy in particular has space to grow, and that people like my constituents do not have to face those long journeys across particularly hard to navigate on public transport areas. Of course.
First of all, can I congratulate my honourable friend for bringing this really important debate to the Chamber tonight. Northumberland is a wonderful county. Would my honourable friend agree with me? It's not just urban Northumberland that's suffering because of this. We've got banking deserts in Bedlington, Blythe, Ashington, Newbiggin and other areas where vulnerable people are suffering greatly, where the banks are just up and left without any accountability. And furthermore, does my honourable friend agree with me that one must take action straight away to look after these vulnerable people?
The Honourable Gentleman is absolutely right. I know how hard he fights for his constituents across Blythe and Ashington, and I know how much bank closures have impacted his part of the world in the more urban parts of Northumberland too. And I completely agree with him that we need to fight for those services in all of our constituencies. I'm reminded of a 74-year-old constituent of mine who was forced to travel from Wark to Morpeth on 3 separate occasions in order to have a face-to-face conversation. Now, for a lot of people, I will.
Thank you, and thank you to my honourable friend for bringing this incredibly important debate to this place and for the powerful argument that he has already made for it. In my constituency, the impact of bank closures is felt acutely in the Seaton Valley area, where villages like Seghill, Seaton Delaval, Seaton Sluice, Hartley, you have to travel several buses to be able to access the banking services which people so desperately need to be able to readily find. Would he agree? Would my honourable friend agree with me that for vulnerable and elderly residents like those which he is describing, it is unacceptable for them to have to travel, sometimes for hours, across multiple buses to be able to access these services?
I absolutely agree with my honourable friend, and I thank her for giving me a slightly unintended promotion. I absolutely. When I consider the vast scale that is my constituency and that is our wonderful county of Northumberland, the names on a map, the names that we're saying now may seem just like names that we're putting down, but actually they are separated by huge distances and by a public transport system that doesn't always seem to work as it should. It's not fair to have vulnerable people being forced to travel often an hour by car directly, as in the case of a lot of my constituents, 90 minutes by public transport either way. It's simply unfair to expect our constituents to put up with, let's be frank, a sort of second-class service just because they live rurally. Unfortunately, that has been the case in large parts of our county. I think it's incredibly important that we move to address these, and these are communities we all recognise, in my part in particular, and in my own friend from North Northumberland, that historically have voted Conservative, but who at the last election for the first time put their faith in the Labour Party. We were elected to deliver meaningful change for our constituencies. Now, I applied for this debate having spent my time as a candidate listening to the concerns of people across the constituency, but there's one area in particular that I would highlight, which is Haltwhistle and the towns and the villages around it, where the recent loss of Barclays last year is still damaging the local economy. I've been in touch with the chair of Haltwhistle's Chamber of Trade, Ian Donnet, who told me directly that the loss of banking facilities in a rural town such as Haltwhistle has had a negative effect on every business. Our members have been affected, with most having accounts at Barclays because of their presence in the town, and the replacement of an active branch with a peripatetic community hub having removed the relationship between business and branch. For many businesses that deal in cash, Ian's business, I should say, is a B&B with many guests paying in cash, and a lot of Haltwhistle's passing trade is from tourist spend on Hadrian's Wall. They've lost the ability to pay directly into the bank, with the nearest Barclays branch being 20 miles away. Haltwhistle businesses feel that that bank has simply said to them to just use the post office, a business over which they have no control as it remains a separate business.
Would my honourable friend give way?
I will.
I'd like to thank my honourable friend for securing this debate, an important issue in both his constituency and my own. I'd actually like to draw attention to that issue, a correlated issue of post offices in particular. Right now in Wooler in North Northumberland, where there are no bank branches, the post office, which provides the only banking services for that community, is also at risk of closure. Thankfully, the incredible community response in Wooler, led by the Glendale Gateway Trust, is fighting to retain it, and I'll do everything in my power to do that too. But would my honourable friend agree that both banking hubs more generally and the post office more specifically must be part of the solution to the lack of access to banking services in Northumberland?
I thank the honourable gentleman for his intervention. I completely agree. The post office for many businesses, many constituents, represents a lifeline, albeit is one that is unfortunately for many businesses accessed far too infrequently for them to operate with security. Now, the decisions to close rural branches taken from head offices with little to no understanding of the rural economy and the impact that their decisions have on our constituents, their businesses and their daily lives. I will, happily.
I'd like to thank the honourable member for securing a really important adjournment debate on this topic. Whitehaven, not dissimilar to Haltwhistle, is a town in my constituency that is right on the brink of becoming a banking desert as well. Does my honourable friend agree with me that we shouldn't have to wait for towns to become banking deserts before banking hubs become an option, and actually a better system would be to change the criteria, the rule for banking hubs, so that they move to a last plus one rather than a complete banking desert before the option becomes available?
I thank the honourable member for his intervention. I very much agree with him. I think we've been seeing far too many rural towns and general rural economies faced with a precipice when the bank leaves, and you then deal with that level of uncertainty, that level of deprivation of banking services that has a ongoing damage to the economy before anything comes in.
So I would hope that we can look at whatever steps we can to mitigate the impact of those closures, and I agree that a move to a last but one system may be far more efficient within that. I also agree that Whitehaven, being as it is on the Tyne Valley train line, is a town that shares many of the challenges that I'm speaking about. And so I think this demonstrates the incredibly important nature of this debate. You know, in a constituency such as mine and such as those many honourable friends who've contributed, many residents and businesses already travel into town for banking. And when they're there, they do other shopping. They do shopping in the major towns or in the cities where they've got access to other shops, other services, and that has a massive impact on the passing trade in towns like Holtwhistle and in other towns across the Tyne Valley. As Ian Dommett, the chair of the Chamber of Trade, said, for Holtwhistle this meant that every shop in the town has lost the trade, and every one of the Chamber of Trade members who are retailers say they've seen a decline in business as it is now done in towns with functioning banks. I would argue that Holtwhistle as a town has been and continues to be let down by the Conservatives and has done for years. But this is a stunning indictment of policy failure. Businesses that want to drive economic growth being hamstrung, with shops having stepped up in some cases for elements of consumer banking, such as offering cashback services, having ATMs in store, but they shouldn't need to. And businesses shouldn't be deprived of business banking when ultimately it is they who are the engines of our rural economy. We need to move away from the significant economic disruption that towns like Holtwhistle have had for 12 months, over 12 months since August 2023. Now, one particular area that lack of access to banking has brought about, I was incredibly proud this summer to be asked to become a patron of the Northumberland Domestic Abuse Service. Speaking with them, I mentioned that I'd secured this debate and was told that access to in-person banking services can be a vital lifeline for some victims of domestic abuse. In a rural setting in particular, this being absolutely vital. I'd urge the Minister to look at bringing forward plans for banking hubs in Holtwhistle in my constituency to ensure that residents can access in-person banking services and to work with organisations like NDAS to explore the impact that banking deserts can have, particularly on acute domestic violence. I was proud to run on the manifesto prioritising rolling out banking hubs to those banking deserts. But it should be stated that banking hubs should not just be seen as replacements for bank branches. It shouldn't be an opportunity for banks to shut down, run out of town, and leave others picking up the pieces in their communities. When decisions are made far from the communities that those decisions impact, those decisions are inevitably worse. One of the most meaningful ways that we can support those towns to grow economies and provide opportunity to young people, security to those elderly residents, is to make sure that at the very least they have a banking hub in place. One that doesn't just serve one town, but serves communities across the rural hinterland. I'd therefore like to ask the Minister that the Treasury strongly considers and prioritises Holtwhistle as a location for a future banking hub to reflect the opportunities and investment that could bring and the opportunities for businesses to grow. Further, I will, happily.
I represent a thriving market town in Somerset called Frome, and even there in May it was announced that we were going to lose our last bank. And I wonder whether the honourable member would agree with me that actually, given that banks play such an important role in our communities and our businesses, that there should be some obligation placed on banks to ensure that they do provide adequate provision across all the different communities in any given constituency, because we can see from the discussion this evening that it's absolutely critical to so many aspects of our public life that we have proper banking provision.
Thank you, and I absolutely agree with the Honourable Lady. I think it's important that banks recognise the almost unique role that they play in our high streets as anchor institutions, and that they need to be far more responsible when conditions dictate that bank branches perhaps need to close. This is not about asking them to play a role of charity. It's about asking them to play a responsible role in our economy and in our society. And as an MP for many picturesque market towns, I recognise the problems that she's having in her constituency as well. I think it's important that we represent now the infrequent availability that post office services has had in individuals in my constituency, and in particular on elderly companies, elderly customers who now have to use the post office as their primary banking facility. I think it would be great if you could join me in encouraging the post office to expand their participation, particularly as I know the government is looking to expand the pension credit take-up campaign. And finally, if you could comment for me just on how the government is working already and will work in future with our fantastic North East Mayor, Kim McGuinness, to improve economic prosperity across some of the most rural and remote areas of our incredibly proud region. Thank you.
Call the Minister, Tulip Siddiq.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I first commend the Honourable Member for Hexham on securing this very important debate, I think his first adjournment debate, but also to congratulate him for being the first Labour MP for Hexham. And can I just say that his Wikipedia famously boasts that he broke a 100-year streak of Conservative MPs to be in this place. And if that isn't an accolade, I don't know what is. Just before I came to this debate, I was having dinner with the member for Warwick and Leamington. And I mentioned to him that I was answering a debate called by the Honourable Member for Hexham, and he'd be pleased to know, he said, Hexham is the most beautiful place he has ever been to in his life. So many thanks to all the honourable, I would say other than Hampstead and Highgate, obviously, but thank you to all the other honourable members of this House who contributed to this important debate. I think the fact that you've stayed behind, that members have stayed behind at 10:15 on a Monday, on the first day back to Parliament on a one-line whip, demonstrates their commitment to this important debate, because I know it affects many of our constituents, and they are absolutely right to champion it, Madam Deputy Speaker. Sure.
Lizzie College. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and thank you to my honourable friend for calling this debate. Would the Minister agree with me that the conditions in rural areas make it particularly difficult for people to take up the alternatives given by banks, such as digital access? Despite the fantastic work of broadband for the rural north in my constituency, many of my constituents do not have access to broadband, and access to digital banking is simply out of reach for many. Thank you.
I thank the Honourable Member for her intervention. I know she's a doughty champion for her constituents, and I absolutely hear what she says about a rural constituency. Mine isn't a rural constituency, but I speak to people across the country who are really struggling with the digital connectivity that she outlines, and it's something the government's taking very seriously and is aware of the obstacles put in the way of people trying to access the services online. This, as I should also say, is my first parliamentary debate as Economic Secretary to the Treasury, and I'm very pleased it is, because it's an issue that's so close to my heart and one that I'm determined to try and address. And it's a privilege to be able to use this office to tackle some of the country's most important issues, like the Honourable Member just said, ensuring access to banking and supporting financial inclusion as well, which featured very highly in our manifesto that all of us behind us were elected on that mandate. And we want to make sure our constituents do manage to access the services that they deserve. But before I get on to the meat of the topic, I just want to provide briefly the context to this issue, because although many people have benefited from change to the UK's banking landscape, such as the ease and convenience for some people of remote banking, it's clear to me that others have found it a lot more challenging. So according to Which, the consumer organisation, over 600 branches in the UK have closed since 2015. Bank branch closures have significantly impacted those in community who need access in-person banking services. And I am really sorry to hear about some of the specific cases that we've heard raised today, especially the Honourable Member from Hexham, who talked about his 74-year-old constituent who had to travel so far, is particularly one that stood out to me, because that shouldn't be the case. And I want to assure him that the government does understand the importance of face-to-face banking and the banking access to our communities. It's not key only to the health and vibrancy of those communities, but as he also pointed out, it helps them drive forward and benefit from our country's economic growth and rural economy. So please don't be in any doubt for anyone listening to the debate. The government does share this objective in enhancing access to banking services, and we will be prioritising its delivery accordingly. And work has already started beginning. Obviously, we haven't been in government very long, but we have committed, even before the election, to working closely with banks to roll out at least 350 banking hubs, which will provide individuals and businesses up and down the country with critical cash and banking services.
On that point. Thanks very much, Minister. Banking hubs are, in many ways, very helpful. However, would the Minister consider reviewing the criteria for the banking hubs? I've got an issue in my constituency where the nearest bank is 1/10 of a mile too short to get a banking hub 1/10 of a mile. That's about from here to there. And because of that, they're considering not putting in place a banking hub. Is there a potential to review this criteria to support the most vulnerable people in our communities?
Thank the Honourable Member for his intervention, and I absolutely hear what he has to say about protecting vulnerable people in our constituency, and that's why a lot of us stood for the Labour Party, because we want to protect the most vulnerable. I will come on a bit later to talk about Link, who are the people who provide the banking hubs, but what I can do is I can write to the Honourable Member specifically on this topic and about the criteria around it, and if he wouldn't mind writing to me and laying out exactly what the issue is, because it sounds like there's a very small matter here which needs to be looked at. I'm happy to look at that as well. But I will talk a bit later on in my speech about Link, and I would ask him to make representations as well. Yes, of course. No.
And Speaker, can I first of all congratulate the Honourable Lady in attaining the office that she now has, and wish her well in that position for the future. The Minister referred to 350, I think it was, banking hubs across the whole of, I presume that's across the whole of the United Kingdom, Great Britain and Northern Ireland. I hope it is. If it isn't, Madam Deputy Speaker, could I ask the Minister to confirm that the same progression and enthusiasm that the Minister is showing will happen for Northern Ireland as well? And could I ask her one other thing as well, please? I said it to the Honourable Member for Hexham when he spoke beforehand. When it comes to setting up banking hubs, they seem to take forever. What we all want, the banks away, we want a banking hub in place. Is that something perhaps maybe the Minister could help us with as well? Thank you.
I thank the Honourable Member for his intervention, and no adjournment debate would be complete without his intervention, so I'm glad he did intervene. I was waiting for him to intervene. What I would say is I do share his frustration about the slowness of the rollout, and it's something I pushed for when I was in opposition as well, asking why it's taken so long. I will address this in my speech, but I can reassure him is that as much as influence that I have from our office, we have been asking for the banking hubs to be set up and ready, and we're hoping to achieve the number of 100 banking hubs by the end of this year. But I am conscious of the fact that it does take a long time to set up, and it's to do with the planning process, but that isn't an excuse, and I would like to speed up this rollout because I feel like it's been dragging on for a long time. So I absolutely share his frustration. So 60 banking hubs, the Honourable Member might know, have already opened, and we do anticipate, as I said, that 100 will be open at the end of this year, but I agree with the Honourable Member, it's frustrating having to wait and watch, and we want them to be up and running so our constituents can make good use of them. We want to ensure that the hubs will mean that people and businesses can withdraw and deposit cash, because we know people still use that. They will deposit cheques, pay bills and make balance inquiries. They will also contain dedicated community bankers from the largest banks in the area on a rotating basis to help people and businesses carry out wider banking services. But the decisions on the locations of future banking hubs will be made by Link. So the banking industry's cash coordinating body, and they will consider criteria such as population size, for example, number of retailers in the community, and availability of alternative bank branches. So communities can ask Link to carry out an assessment of the local area, and would urge my honourable friend and the honourable friend from Hexham to raise this with them and to make the case that he's so convincingly made to me to Link, because at the end of the day we've asked them to make the decisions, but obviously I can help in the process as well. So looking forward, I do expect the banks to carefully consider whether the needs of a local community are being adequately served when thinking about where the banking hubs should be rolled out. But I also want the industry to ensure that the range and the quality of banking services provided in hubs are delivering for the customers up and down the country. There's no point having a banking hub if it doesn't actually meet the requirements of the specific town. I mean, just, yeah. Yeah,
thank you, Madam Speaker. And can I welcome the Minister to her place? And Madam Speaker, if you'll indulge me, I suspect the Minister will want to know, as I do, the passing of Nicky Gavon, who a former Deputy Mayor of London, a very good friend of mine and a constituent of the Minister's. She died on the 30th of August, and I wanted to make sure that that was acknowledged in this House. I congratulate my friend, the member for Hexham, on this really important debate, and I've got 2 quick points to put to the Minister. One, can you outline what conversations you've had with the banks to make sure that they put people over profit? I'm very proud to represent Newcastle and Lyme. I know the Minister hasn't been. If you had, you'd agree that it's the most beautiful place in our country. But what conversations have we had to make sure that people over profit is the focus? And secondly, how can we make sure accessibility is a really important point, not just in words, but in deeds too?
Thank you. I thank my honourable friend for his intervention, and can I associate myself with the comments about Nicky Gavron, who was my constituent and a great friend as well, and has been working with us in London Labour since, dare I say, the honourable member was a very young man at the time, but we have worked with her for many years. Very sad to see her go. On the point about banks, I can reassure the honourable member that I am speaking to them every single day to make sure that they know what our values are and how we want it to be delivered, but also I'm saying to them that beyond banking hubs, that a key banking service for communities to ensure that they have accessibility, cash withdrawal and deposit services. It's particularly the case for our local businesses and charities who often deal in cash and they need convenient ways to deposit their takings, but also for everyone who uses cash to make everyday purchases. So according to UK Finance, cash remained the second most popular payment method only last year. So all those who are dismissing the fact that people use cash anymore and, trying to question that is actually not true, because the data overall shows that cash coverage in the UK remains good. According to FCA analysis, over 99% of the UK urban population are within 1 mile of a free cash withdrawal point. Furthermore, over 98% of the UK rural populations are within 3 miles of a free cash withdrawal point, which I hope reassures some of our members. But it's important that this coverage is maintained. And so I do welcome the FCA's forthcoming rules on access to cash, under which designated banks and building societies will be required to access the impact of a closure of a community's ability to access cash. If a closure results in a gap in provision, then firms will be required to put in place a new service that meets the community's needs. That could mean a new ATM, deposit service, or a banking hub. So where a new service is recommended, firms will need to make sure that this is in place before they're able to close the existing service, ensuring that we avoid gaps in cash access from emerging. So these rules will come into force on the 18th of September, and I'm sure will be welcomed by members across the House. We do recognise that banking has changed. We do recognise the shift towards online and mobile access. It means that customers have more ways to access banking services conveniently and securely. But banking users have clearly taken up those opportunities, because the recent Financial Conduct Authority data shows almost 9 in 10 adults banked online. But it doesn't mean that everyone has the means, confidence and skills to use the service, which is the point made by many people behind me today. So we recognise that although we live in an increasingly online world, parts of the population, including my constituents, remain digitally excluded. So as a government, we are committed to improving connectivity and digital access for all constituents. We will continue to support rollout of a modernised broadband infrastructure through Project Gigabit, closing the digital divide for remote areas of Britain. This government has already started the renewed push to reach full gigabit coverage by 2030, this month announcing £800 million of funding to improve broadband for over 300,000 rural homes and businesses. And as of August of this year, Think Broadband reports that approximately 84.24% of the UK now can access a gigabit-capable connection. So, while the majority of premises will be covered by commercial activity or Project Gigabit, for those part of the UK where it's not possible, the government is considering alternative ways to improve connectivity, and we will bear areas in mind if constituents want to write to me, or if members want to write to me. I'm very conscious of time, so I'm just going to quickly say that I would like to thank everyone for their thoughtful contributions today, but this won't be my last speech on this matter. I want the member for Hexham and other members who have spoken today to take them along on my journey, to work together with the financial services sector, with the public to deliver financial services. And I want to mention quickly the post office network. I don't have time, is that right? You're looking at me, okay. I will just say that the government is committed to looking for ways to strengthen the post office network. The Secretary of State met the chair of the post office to discuss this and other important issues, and the government protects the post office network by setting minimum access criteria to ensure that 99% of the UK population lives within 3 miles of a post office, with around 11,000 and over branches in the UK. Madam Deputy Speaker, you've been very kind and allowed me a bit more extra time, and I'd just like to finish by thanking once again the member for Hexham.
Order, order. The House stands adjourned.